Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization.
Okay, so welcome. Today I'm introducing Cody, the coordination voice and ambassador for Immortalis, the pioneering medical freedom zone dedicated to radical health, innovation through voluntary ethics, principled governance, and unrestricted scientific exploration. Welcome, Cody Dean.
Thank you. Everybody hear me okay? I want to hold the mic today, so this is good. I'll fall down. How's everybody feeling? I know it's Sunday, it's the events, everybody tired, everybody energized. What do we got? All right. Got energy, let's go. So we've been talking a lot at the booth. You see a lot of people I've been interviewing. So what I wanted to talk about here is what is immortality. I'm going to answer the question for everybody so everyone can hear it. And everyone can watch it later on the recording. So Immortalis is a biotech freedom zone. So if you think about Singapore, Dubai, Shenzhen, and what they were able to do with just a little bit of regulatory reform. So take Singapore as the example. They were able to take financial reform in that area, and because of that, become the financial hub of the world. And everyone goes there for all of that to do with that. But somehow, and are well on our way to doing that. And it does so to create the environment, the sandbox, where the people that we see on the stage here, Liz Harris, Aubrey Gray, Bill Andrews, Greg Faith, and the list goes on. Still, and the way to do that is we're going to work with whichever regulators we do work with, depending on the country. In the U.S., I think FDA, to streamline regulation, get fast track approval processes, and $1 billion anymore. You can all one farm with fast track approvals and approval here through the trial from phase 1, phase 2 to phase 3 can be a lot cheaper, and through the cheaper price tag and the shorter timeline, it's going to show potential investors a higher success rate. That's what made it very good, not in the picture anymore. So that's going to cause an influx of investment into these people who have been asking for money, especially he's great at asking for money. It's just you have to process everything. And the reason that's important is because it's our lives, it's our loved ones' lives. There's 90% of the entire population knows somebody in their family or in their circle that is afflicted with nasty, age-related, causes turmoil in so many people's lives. That's what we want to do. It's been the mission ever since we started. It's relatively early. It started in September last year, and we made a meeting part. It actually started when it was first launched on September 3rd, right before RAADfest last year, as a 10-year plan. But in the last 10 months since then, we've made so much progress. The rest of the year, we're very bullish that within 6 months or so, we're going to have an actionable zone unlocked within the continental United States. So this is very exciting. And also in we're also in talks with a few other governments, 2 or 3 more governments around the world as well. And we'll talk more about that as we can, as that becomes more public. I'm sure rotation and tell us one thing about that later. But there's more. Go further than this. There are special economic limitations across there and other cities that are within that have created the environment for like a lot of things happen. And what's going on across there, or many of them. Across there, okay, I'll talk a little bit more. Across there, maybe the government on there is to have such an economic zone where there's much less regulation, a lot more free to have innovations work, not just in longevity, but in a lot of different fields. So they're kind of a bigger environment where anybody who wants to reduce regulation can come in and innovate. The challenges come around and the next administration under a government and decided they didn't like the deal anymore. And so there's a huge thing going on. I'm not a big across there, so I won't get into details. Maybe there's people around me you can talk about it. So what's different about what we are doing is we're going to we like all the zones we're working on, the ones in the United States and others around the world. In all, it's a concept. As in, we want to prove that what we're doing can work on a small scale, which would be an autonomous zone in the United States or in South America, Europe, or wherever. And we can see that we do a little bit of reduction in regulation because we don't have this zone within a host country. You don't get full autonomy. No governments can say, yeah, take a piece of our land and we'll just buy it out and do your thing. You are our state. That is wishful thinking. It's not going to. So there's going to be some level of leaders and work within what they're okay with. So we'll be able to streamline regulation, but there will still be things to work with. So the proof of concept is we're going to take that, whatever percentage we can get, whether it's a 50% reduction in regulation, 70% or 30%, some places will work more than others. But even just a little bit of reduction in regulation is going to show that it's going to speed up the timeline of coming up with life-saving therapies. There's gene therapy, stem cell therapies, or I was talking to a guy who wants to do full body or full organ replacement things. All of these things could be possible much faster, even with a slight reduction in regulation. But when people see that and see how much cheaper it is to do, they're going to realize that the more regulation is reduced, the faster and the cheaper it's going to be to do this. And who knows people who don't have 5 or 10 years maybe to stay alive and awake? I'm sure many people, okay, or maybe 15 to 20 years. This timeline has been pushed over and over and over again. But with that proof of concept, people are going to see reduction in regulation makes it cheaper, speeds it up. So then what happens if there is a sovereign nation that is based on this idea of innovation and not anarchy, because we don't want snake oil salesmen coming in and say, take this saline solution and it's going to make you live forever. We can't have that. There's got to be a level of safety and vetting. But if there is a country that is based on this, then there's no host country outside of that to say, no, we changed our mind, we're going back on our deal. There's no host country to say, yeah, we'll give you a little bit of leeway so that way you can help improve our economy. We've got full rights to create the governance that is truly needed to allow innovation to flourish safely, to save all of our lives. So what this is going to do, actually, just imagine this for a moment. This is an amazing concept. Go back to 1776 and 2 years before that. There's the United States of America. The founding fathers, the vision they had, we take it all for granted now, but the vision they had of freedom that they wrote in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, was something that had never been seen before.
and barely even thought about, and was violently opposed, obviously, by the British government that didn't want to allow it. They wanted to keep making the taxes on it. But they knew that that was the next evolution of human society. We needed to have more individual freedom. And I'm going to digress a little bit more here and talk about some of the governance structure, because America in the first 150 years was a beautiful thing with laissez-faire capitalism, and we have so much innovation, and society became so much better. We don't have to work as hard anymore to survive, and the Industrial Revolution happened, and there's the negative parts of that too, with labor and labor laws came around. But America was founded on making sure some unalienable rights were addressed. And that actually is where the challenge comes in, because once you say you can have this right, then that leaves room to say, now you can't because you messed up. And it also leaves room for, well, this group has the rights, but this group doesn't. And so what the founding fathers admit, I forget which one it was, but one of the founding fathers actually said the Declaration of the Constitution was not perfect, but they had to get something out there. And what we've identified, and the founder, Mark Hamilton, here, has identified is you need to eliminate the negative in order to have a sustainable governance that can scale from what we would call a pop-up city today, or a small nation, to a full-size nation. And by eliminating the negative, what that is force, initiatory force. If we can eliminate that and protect the individual, it's a protection-based system, where the individual, their contract, their property is protected from force, fraud, and coercion. And this includes innovative companies. And this works both ways. It gives the innovative companies freedom to do their research without it also protects their consumers. If those companies are to remain in business, they have to be fully transparent. They have to be doing things to benefit their consumers, otherwise they will be shut down. So this is the underlying structure of what a sovereign nation would look like. And this is what we're trying to get as close to as possible in these proof of concept zones that we are going for. So actually, I've got about 12 minutes, so let me take, does anybody have any questions? I can take one or two. I know you have people on the live stream. Is there any questions there?
Well, there is a comment from our friend Zach Richardson, who says, it's great to hear that longevity is so desired that we're working both within the system and outside the system.
Yes, that is a good comment. Thank you for that. And that is a really good point, because a lot of people try to change the system from within, and you can't really fix something that big that's broken. And not very many people, if anyone, have tried to actually just take a parallel track. So very good comment. Thank you. We got one right here.
Sure. To your point earlier about changing administrations and what kind of data comes from Prospera. For the United States, for example, let's say you negotiate with an administration which is very much in favor of reducing regulations and everything looks great. 4 years later, you have a new administration and they want to jump more. What kind of measures can we take based on the lessons of Prospera to guard against that here in the United States?
It's a very good question, and I'll repeat it so it can be heard on the recording. I mentioned Prospera earlier, which had an agreement with Honduras, but then there was an administration change, and the new administration went back on the whole administration deal. But how do we prevent that in, say, the United States, when maybe there's room right now to make that kind of agreement, but in the next 4 years, if the administration changes, and they don't like it anymore? What kind of safeguards can we put in place so that some of that?
Exactly.
Okay, so there's no perfect answer to that, because working within a host country, at the end of the day, it could always be taken back. But there can be some safeguards put in place, and without saying too much, we are working with people who are helping us introduce this into potential executive order and legislative acts.
And also, is there a chance to make some part of the operation local? So if you have a bad
what do visuals do?
Or is there a possibility of making some aspects of the research and incorporation mobile so that the environment changes in one place to be unfavorable, it can move to another place? In other words, an agreement between different jurisdictions?
That's another really good question. I mentioned earlier that we're actually in talks at high levels of government with 3 to 4 countries around the world. And if one were to say, yes, let's go, we're not going to stop conversation with the other one. We're going to continue that. Yes, in the back there. This is the last question, and then I've got something else to do.
Have you had any discussions with the people at Neovia?
We are aware of them, and actually Jose has been very vocal about Liberland. I like the concept of what they're doing. It's just a very small area, not much to work with there. All right. So in the last couple minutes I have here, I wanted to give a chance, because I've talked yesterday on stage, I'm talking today on stage, but I wanted to give a little bit of vision to the founder and the co-founder of Immortalis. So Mark and Wallace, if you could come up here, and of course our superstar, Jose Cordero, who has been amazing in helping to introduce us to people. If the 3 of you could come up here and so we have the founder, Mark Hamilton, co-founder, Wallace Hamilton, and of course, everybody else.
Hey everybody, my name is Wallace Hamilton, and I'm the co-founder of Immortalis, and I'm standing beside our incredible team here, and the man who started it all, my father, Mark Hamilton. Immortalis, so Immortalis was born from one idea. What if we stopped waiting for someone else to build the civilization we want, and just build it ourselves? So for 40 years, my father has helped millions of people unlock a life so exhilarating that they develop the desire to live forever. And now we want to create the new society engineered to give people that beautiful life worth living forever. And that's what we're doing with Freedom Zones. And our first target is biotech. These zones are designed to unleash the biotech revolution we need to cure aging and death within our lifetimes. And thank you, RAADfest. This community is incredible, and we're going to be back next year and bring a lot of people.
Thank you, Cody and Wallace. I appreciate that. Going off what you said there, since I've been in the RAADfest, it's my first, I just feel lots of love here. You guys feel that? Can I hear a yes? I thought about this last night. Why do I feel all this love? I mean, you look around and have superstars like Jose here, and you have superstars like Liz Parrish, Bill Andrews, Greg Beatty, Bill Balloon, I mean, businessmen, scientists, doctors, of course, James Stroll. These guys are superstars, but I see them out there just mixing with all of us, just friendly and giving hugs and having conversations, giving time. And of course, Jose is available to anyone, anytime. It's just love in the air. And I thought, why is there so much love in the air? And I realized it's the love of life. We're all here with one common denominator. We all realize how valuable life is. Can I hear a yes? Yes. We're all here together. And so just to wrap this up, because we're running out of time, I want to have him tell you a little bit about what we're doing. Immortalis, I consider it the missing piece. The missing piece to a super puzzle. There's a lot of people out there putting together pieces to the puzzle of longevity, but they need a place to come together and be able to, as Cody expressed, move forward freely with proper, regulations, but not over-regulation, in order to extend our lives and save lives, and to understand that we are the most precious thing in the universe. That's been my goal for 45 years, and now we're going to bring it into the real world. So we're all here with one common denominator, and we all are going to someday live together, create together, and cure aging and death together. Well, it is a pleasure to be here with Mark, with Wallace, and with Cody. The four of us will be in a month in Argentina, meeting with the president of Argentina. Actually, I'm very excited to say I have known Javier Milei for a quarter of a century, not from now. I know him for a long, long time. When he was a student at the university, I met him, and I thought this guy was a genius. And we became friends in the year 2000. And so we are still friends. In fact, he invited me to his inauguration. I went with him in Buenos Aires. This is the Oval Office of the White House in Buenos Aires, the equivalent of the Oval Office. And he has said publicly that he is an immortalist and that he does not plan to die, and that his favorite book is The Death of Death. Actually, he said it in the most important newspaper of Argentina, which is La Nación. As you can see, La Muerte de la Muerte by José Luis Cordero, and by my co-author, who is sitting there, David, if you can raise your hand. So David is doing an incredible work also in the United Kingdom. I live in Spain. I'm trying to do the same in Spain. And obviously we are here in the USA. I think these are three important countries for immortality. The USA, of course, the greatest, biggest, freest nation. And we are very happy. In fact, our founder here, Mark Hamilton, he's working with the US administration because President Donald Trump talked about freedom cities. So he talked about this during his campaign. So there is a possibility of having this longevity freedom city. But in any event, my goal as well, because I'm very well connected internationally, and again, we hope to have some news in a month when we are in Buenos Aires, the four of us in the Oval Office with the president of Argentina. In a month after that, I will meet with the president of El Salvador. El Salvador is another country with a visionary president who actually adopted Bitcoin as currency and who created Bitcoin City. So we might have a Immortalis sitting next to Bitcoin City in El Salvador. We don't know. Actually, Immortalis is very nice. We were just joking. It is like the metropolis of immortality. Okay, the metropolis of immortality. So also because I live in Spain, there is a tiny, tiny country between Spain and France. Does anyone now know how it's called? Andorra. Andorra is a tiny country, but it's not part of the European Union. And that means they can create their own laws. So I'm also talking to them. I hope to be in Andorra in the next few months to talk to the government because they want to move into the future, and the future is longevity. So I think something, and also, as you know, I was in Croatia and Bosnia 3 months ago, and we also have another country, but one of those countries in the Balkan area is also interested in immortality. So we are exploring different countries, different governments, different possibilities, and as Cody was explaining, it is okay if it is here first and then another place. I personally don't care. I just want to keep that. You know? I want to keep that before death deals out. So that is our goal. And because now I live in Spain, and this is a Spanish flag, we had the US flag, but Cody forgot it today.
He told me to bring it yesterday, not today.
So anyway, I also organized RAADfest equivalent in Spain. All of you are welcome to come. It will be last 2 days of September, first 2 days of October, in the most beautiful place in Spain, in the College of Medical Doctors, where the Spanish Nobel Prize, Santiago Ramón y Cajal, who discovered the synapses, the connections between the neurons, where he gave his lecture. So all of you are welcome to come to Madrid. You are welcome to come to Argentina with us. 4 people with the president is big enough. But maybe we convince him, as we hope so, and then we will invite him because he has said he is an immortalist and he cloned his dog. He's so futuristic. He's the only president who has cloned his dog. He's a transhumanist, a singularitarian, and an immortalist. This is fantastic, the president of Argentina. So anyway, those are my comments. We are very proud of Immortalis, this metropolis of immortality. So we can take some questions. I guess we still have a few minutes.
We have 40 seconds.
Yeah, okay, let's take one question.
Back here, or
Whoever speaks first.
someone take
We actually have 5 minutes. Okay, we'll take a question. Who has a question? Okay, one question there. We're going to take your time.
I recommend looking at Saudi Arabia also. They're very speech-oriented and they don't have rapid turnover after administrations. But also, just to ask, I'm sorry if you already covered this and I missed it, but are you planning on constructing a new city on undeveloped land, or are you trying to take over existing infrastructure? Because one of the things I found is if the locals or whoever's in the city aren't opting in, then it eventually can be really problematic. So I'm wondering what your plan is to address that.
Yeah, we're open to both options there of developing on raw land or going to infrastructure that's already there. But to the point of people opting in, it's actually a really important thing for us. We want to go in and make sure that people know the benefit they're going to receive for it. And once they see that, they're going to want us there, they're going to love that we are there, because they're going to have the cheapest and the best healthcare available in the world.
Another quick question. Okay, here we are.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Tribal nation.
Again, we're open to options. I've heard mixed reviews about going on to tribal nations. So if someone had different information, we'd be willing to look at that. We're open to it.
3 minutes. 3 minutes.
So I have a question, like earlier, to the risks that governments might change their mind. Isn't your best defense against that? Demonstrate somewhere in the world that your innovation is working well, that it's not leading to an innovation of chaos and an innovation of people being deceived, but rather to a blossoming of many cures. And once people see it happening in one place in the world, everybody else is going to be rushing to copy it.
That's exactly right. And that's why the zones we're going for, in our eyes, are proof of concept. People are going to see that it is effective, and they're going to want to see it be more effective, and then we can get parallel to existing governments.
2 minutes. We can take one more question.
So one of our viewers online is asking how there could be longevity for the common man. How can Immortalis help with that?
Competition. Once a treatment is created, then other people can see that, reverse engineer, or if it's open source, just take the original information and innovate and make it better. And this has been shown throughout even the Industrial Revolution that the more people are working on something, the better it is and the cheaper it is.
So thank you. Join Immortalis, the metropolis of immortality.
Live free, live forever.
Yes. ¡Viva la revolución!
Step into a future where imagination powers everything. In the world of New Terlandia, young explorers unlock their creativity through amazing brain upgrades. With art, technology, and a splash of transhumanist wonder, they learn to shape a brighter tomorrow. The Transhumanist children's book, When Everyone Chose to Live Longer and Create Art, is a vibrant bilingual adventure that will spark curiosity in every young dreamer. Available on Amazon.
Greetings. We are at the Immortalis booth, setting up for the interview with me, which will happen soon. In the meantime, we will continue to have a brief musical interlude. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. We are here at RAADfest 2025 in Las Vegas, Nevada at the Red Rock Resort, and you just heard a presentation from Cody Dean of Immortalis. They are creating new freedom zones to maximize the rate of progress of our civilization in order for us to reach longevity escape velocity. So Cody, excellent presentation, and I'm here at your booth, the Immortalis booth, to speak with you. So please ask me anything you want to know about the Transhumanist Party, how we can work together.
Fantastic. Yeah, I've seen you come to these RAADfest events, I think ever since my first one. You've been to probably every single one of them.
Every single one since 2016.
Okay, and you've been the chairman of the Transhumanist Party that entire time, right?
Yes, so the Transhumanist Party was actually founded in 2014, and Zoltan Istvan was the founder, first presidential candidate and first chairman, but after the conclusion of the 2016 presidential election, he decided to move on to other endeavors, and he asked me to be his successor, essentially, and I have run the Transhumanist Party ever since for over 8.5 years now.
Okay, and I think the last candidates that ran was Charlie Cam and Liz Parrish, is that correct?
Charlie Cam and Liz Parrish ran in 2020. They were great candidates. We also, in 2024, had a ticket of Tom Ross and Daniel Tweed.
Okay, and so what do you do as chairman? You just coordinate who runs as the campaign, and then do you run, like, how much of a move, is it U.S., is it a global movement?
Well, it is a global movement, even though we are the U.S. Transhumanist Party. We have members from all over the world, so we have an allied member category, and no matter where you reside, you can become one of those. And that would constitute about 30% of our members. We have around 4,700 members in total.
Wow, okay.
And of course, allied members can't vote in U.S. elections, but they can participate in our internal activities. We have these weekly virtual enlightenment salon streams, and we've had other campaigns as well. So we had a mayoral candidate in Camden, New Jersey in 2021, Jennifer Hughes, who actually ran on an explicit pro-life extension platform and challenged the Democratic Party monopoly over Camden, New Jersey, which existed for decades. She was the first non-Democratic Party candidate in decades to compete with them. And then we had Daniel Tweed, who was our 2024 vice presidential candidate. He also ran 4 times for city council in Thousand Oaks, California. And even though he didn't win the city council elections, if you run that often, you get noticed. So he did get an appointment for a time to the Council on Aging of Thousand Oaks, California. And what great fortune it is to have had a transhumanist on the Council on Aging.
That is incredible. All right, so based on the talk that I just did that you heard, how do you see the transhumanist movement working with the Immortalis initiative? Do you see a collaboration there? What are your thoughts?
Yes, I do see the possibilities of collaboration. So first of all, the Transhumanist Party and its platform explicitly supports jurisdictional experimentation in the form of micronations, seasteads, freedom zones, however you want to structure it, whether you want to have your own autonomous territory or collaborate with an existing government, but offer a bit more scope for economic and political freedom. We are in favor of all of that. But moreover, I think there's an important process that can take hold where if you have a freedom zone and innovation is allowed there that's not allowed anywhere else, you could learn something from the results of those undertakings. So if there are therapies administered there that the US FDA wouldn't approve and they help people and they cure certain diseases, or if you have certain governance arrangements, for instance, that would be very hard to implement in a country of 340 million people or in a country with an entrenched political system, but you could try them out and you could provide empirical data about how they worked, whether they worked, what tweaks could be done to improve upon them. All of those lessons could be applied to existing countries, even an ossified system like the United States, where some politicians might be more open to these kinds of innovations and these kinds of reforms. And if a therapy works really well in an Immortalis freedom zone, we could lobby the FDA to approve it in the US.
That's a really good point, because that's exactly what we want to do. We don't want to be an elitist zone where everyone has to come to Immortalis in order to partake in the therapies that come out of it. We want to give the freedom to the scientists in order to come up with these therapies so much faster so they can save lives, but then we also want to make that available everywhere across the world, not just within the zone. So we're very willing to work with existing regulations and regulators to somehow find a middle ground where we can offer these therapies that are found discovered in Immortalis across the world to clinics and everything.
Great. What I really like about your approach and what I heard in abundance from you today in your presentation is the pragmatism. You're not just looking at one particular implementation. You are looking at whatever is going to work, whatever is going to make a difference within existing systems or new systems that you create. And I've come to have that mindset over the years as well. As I said yesterday in my remarks, I have a strong small L libertarian streak. I've been quite disillusioned with the capital L Libertarian Party in the United States, as I think are a lot of people who think the way that we do. But I very much value individual liberty. I very much value technological progress, the freedom to engage in that, the freedom for people to seek out the solutions that work best for them and actually work to achieve the outcomes that they seek: longer life, greater health, greater prosperity. So we can't just remain within a particular rigid framework to achieve those. We have to find out what works in the real world, and the Transhumanist Party has been definitely dedicated to that kind of experimentation. But we are, though we're an international movement with an international reach, we are a US-based political party, so we have to work within the constraints of the US political system, but we can still talk to and get insights from others who pursue different experiments in governance and see how we can apply the fruits of this.
Yes, I love it. I wanted to give a chance. I don't know if there are more questions that came in from the live stream. If there were, though, I'd like to answer some of those.
Yes, so we've got some comments in the live stream here, and we would encourage people to essentially get their comments into the YouTube chat. So Jason Geringer, who is our legislative director, writes, "We believe in morphological freedom here," which means also that we have the freedom to not take any treatments if we don't want to. And he's speaking in regard to, let's say, some populist backlash that could be expected. Like, some people have this strange idea that, oh, transhumanist augmentations are like the mark of the beast. And if there really was such a thing, which there's not, nobody would be forced to undertake any sorts of augmentations, any sorts of treatments. And I wonder, since we're both strong supporters of individual freedom, how you think we can get past that backlash, that misperception that somehow what transhumanists are trying to do is going to be some overarching system of control, where we really just want to empower people to make their own choices?
That is an excellent question, and I agree with your sentiments of libertarianism with this small L. And I like to think of it this way, especially in regards to longevity. We want the option to not die. And right now, we're forced to die. And so the fact that we want the option to die, we want to have the freedom to work on these innovations to come up with it. And once there is a cure to aging and death, now death is optional. Those of us who want to live longer can choose to do so. But on the flip side of that, there's nobody anywhere that I know of saying that once we have a cure, you have to take it. That's ridiculous, because everyone has their own faith and their own beliefs. I know people who think of karmic cycles and the death and rebirth is very important to their spirituality, and I embrace that for them. And they should be very free to pursue that. It's optional both ways.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm curious also, Cody, in terms of how you got into the broader longevity movement. What originally made you aware of these advances being pursued and made you excited to contribute?
That's actually a really good story. So at my talk just now, I brought up the founder, Mark Hamilton. And he's an author. He's written books for the past 45 years that have been geared towards shifting the psychology in society to actually desire a cure for aging. And what he identified is that people who don't like their life aren't going to want to keep it going longer. So he developed systems to help people move into a mode that essentially life is a joy, and they want to keep it going without going into huge detail, because these are big books. So I read those, and in reading those, I realized, okay, yeah, I am doing some of these things, and I do want to live longer. And now that I want to, let's see what the possibility of it is, because this is being talked about like it could actually happen. So then I hit the internet. This is like 2014 or so. And I was actually just interviewing Aubrey de Grey, and we talked about this. One of the first things I saw was Aubrey de Grey's TED Talk that he recorded in 2006, talking about aging, and some of the amazing things he had been able to accomplish. Obviously not a cure to aging yet, but very huge steps in the right direction. And once I saw that, it wasn't even a belief level anymore that could happen. It was a knowingness. This can happen. It's just a matter of making it happen. And ever since then, I've been on the watch of the longevity field. And then in 2016, I had a friend of mine who came to the first RAADfest. Somehow I didn't hear about it yet. But when she came home, she was telling everyone about it, including me. So in 2017, I showed up, and the rest is history.
Yes, well, that's a wonderful story, and there are actually quite a few similarities to my own, though I'm about a decade older than you, so these events happened a decade earlier for me, but I discovered Aubrey's work in 2004, and prior to that time, I was an implicit transhumanist and immortalist in the sense that I thought death was wrong, death was an injustice ever since I learned about death. And I wasn't sure before encountering Aubrey's work whether this was a problem that was solvable within our lifetimes, though I still always considered it a worthwhile goal. But when I read about Aubrey's work in 2004, I recognized his strategies for engineered negligible senescence offered a very viable damage repair approach that could be implemented in our lifetimes. And of course, that gives us a fighting chance, enough of a chance that we should direct our efforts to pursuing it. Now, speaking of Mark Hamilton, I also encountered his work around that time.
Oh,
so
you did?
yes, I was in high school, and here's how it happened. I had already read other, let's say, small L libertarian authors. Ayn Rand wouldn't have called herself a libertarian, but she very much inspired a lot of the libertarian movement, but also a lot of the classical liberal thinkers, writers like Frederic Bastiat, or economists like Milton Friedman and Ludwig von Mises. And
Rothbard.
Yes. So interestingly enough, I was having a conversation with some other students about these ideas, and the custodian at my school, he was just one of the ordinary custodians, he came up and he was kind of listening intently, nodding, and he was saying, well, this is very insightful, and I have this book that I've been reading that I'd like to share with you that has very similar ideas. And this was a book by Mark Hamilton. He has many books, and this was a book that outlined, I think, what he called neo-tech or neo-think, and this
Which book was it? Was it one of the big black books, like the heirloom package?
I think it was a white one.
A white one?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, but this was back in 2004, so I think self-publishing, let's say, aesthetics were a lot simpler. So these were books that were, let's say, more substance than style. So I remember like a very simple cover, but a very interesting read, very engaging read. And I was actually thinking when I read that book, really to have these ideas be implemented, the people in this movement would need their own jurisdiction to experiment with. So perhaps what I see,
yes, come around and see Mark Hamilton here talking about Immortalis.
Yes. So what I'm seeing here may be the culmination or the next phase of the ideas in that book.
Okay. That's very cool. So I want to pick your brain now. If you had read that book in 2004 and were aware of Mark Hamilton, when you came to RAADfest this year and heard about Immortalis, and then at some point in time during the weekend realized Mark Hamilton was the founder, what was your thought process on that?
Yes, so my thought process is this the same Mark Hamilton? And I did a little bit of research and I realized, yes, everything aligns in terms of the ideas, in terms of what he has been advocating for years, and it just makes sense that this is what he's doing now, because now the technology is better developed, the communications are better developed, so we're all connected through a much greater variety of media. We don't just have to pass books around with plain white or black covers anymore, we can speak in real time. We have a worldwide audience, and perhaps politicians are more receptive, like Jose talked about Javier Milei, who is a former mentee of Jose's, and I am really intrigued by what Milei might be able to do, because Milei has shown that he's not bound by conventional constraints.
Yeah, we're very excited to see how that discussion goes. And one of the questions I saw when you were going through there is, did Jose call Javier Milei a transhumanist? Yes, he did.
Yes, he did. And Jose knows Javier Milei personally. Now, I don't know Milei personally, but when I was observing Milei's campaign shortly before he won, I realized that there are some key similarities. Now, stylistically, he and I are very different. I wouldn't be wielding a chainsaw on stage or anything like that. But I think the thinking in the background, the insight. So Milei is trained as an economist, and he has been rigorously trained in some of the same core writings that I studied in college. So he's a student of Austrian economics. Yes.
Loves his work.
Yes. I actually wrote a paper in the Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics on Murray Rothbard, comparing and contrasting his views on praxeology, so ideas like the action axiom, the structure of human action, with those of Hans Hermann Hoppe, another Austrian economist, and Ludwig von Mises. And that paper also drew on some of the historical thought tradition in that respect, going back to thinkers like Aristotle. So I'm definitely familiar with that milieu, and it tends to produce, let's say, different styles, but often a common substance underneath those styles. A strong valuation of individual freedom, strong systems thinking, focus on incentives matter, and a focus on kind of the qualitative framework of human action. So it's less like micromanaging the quantitative details. It's less saying, well, we're going to increase GDP by 5% next year. And it's more along the lines of what systems, what incentives in general could maximize human flourishing, human creation, abundance, and thereby raise economic growth. So that's what I think Milei is doing, especially in his efforts to combat inflation in Argentina, which has just been devastating to people. And he has been able to bring that down considerably.
It's amazing, because if you go way, way back, Argentina was a very prosperous country. And then there was, I think it was a 60-year period of just, to put it bluntly, bad politics that put them where they are, a year or two ago before Milei. But even in, you take the 60 years or whatever the number is, someone can correct me, of bad politics that had a lot of issues. In just a year, just over a year, Milei has been able to do so much to start turning that around, and you can actually see a positive incline in the economy and the social dynamics. And so it's really beautiful to see what he's doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you're going to be visiting him in person with Jose. I would be intrigued once you visit him to hear from you how it went, what your impressions were, what you think the potential there is. And I remember after Milei had won, Jose was very enthusiastic about it, and he and I talked a bit, exchanged a bit of correspondence, and I asked Jose, well, now that Milei is in power, is there a chance for him to issue a declaration of aging as a disease or a treatable medical condition, whatever it takes to point attention to the field? And Jose said, essentially, that's perhaps a longer-term hope, but Milei has an inflation crisis, an economic crisis to manage right now. So in the near term, he had his hands full. Now we're in mid-2025, so a year and a half into Milei's administration. I think the economic situation in Argentina has improved considerably, though, of course, it's not trouble-free, and Milei keeps fighting against opposition as well. So the question in my mind will be, how much bandwidth will he have? Will he be receptive to that? But we want to take our allies where we can get them. And the Transhumanist Party is very much a transpartisan kind of endeavor. So we have people spanning all over the traditional political and economic spectrum. So we have some libertarians and anarcho-capitalists, we have some centrists, we have some socialists. So even opinions on Malay differ, but I am very much a pragmatist in this regard. So I'm thinking which people, which institutions, which movements can help us get to the goal, because the goal is one that benefits everybody irrespective of their ideologies or beliefs.
I think something that people miss the mark on is, yeah, we have the ideal world and ideal scene that we want to see happen, and then we have where we are. And most people think, let's just do that. It's not really practical or pragmatic. You got to go in stages and in steps. And you know, the people who are in power and in charge of the world right now are the people who are in charge of it. So we have to go in and work with them where they're at, just to make steps in progress. But once you make those steps in progress, then you can see a little bit further, and then you can go about making more steps. And one step at a time, you get to the finish line.
Yes.
I wish more people would understand that.
Absolutely. And the older I get, of course, the more urgency I feel myself. And I can only imagine what people in their 50s or in their 60s or older must be feeling as well. But in my view, yes, it's primarily about the steps. How do we get from here to there? How do we achieve improvements, whether incremental or radical, whatever we can get that will put us in a better position to live indefinitely, achieve immortality. Yes. So,
well, is there anything else that any other questions you want to bring up? I know Greg Fahey showed up, but we've got a short time on this.
So let's see here in terms of our audience questions. So Jason Geringer was just curious if what Malay was doing was actually going to work, given that Argentina was in really bad shape. And I don't know to what extent you've looked into his policies, but what's your assessment of the situation over there and how it might be relevant to us Immortalists?
I don't think I know enough about what he's doing to speak authoritatively on it, but just from what I have seen, talking with Jose and knowing what I know about Milei, I think it can be done. But it's going to take a lot of time, and there's probably going to have to be a shift of focus at some point for Malay, so he can make sure he gets reelected and has more time to make it happen. So short term, I don't know. Long term, I think he could do it if everything lines up.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Cody. It was great observing your presentation and speaking with you as well. And I wish you and Immortalis all the best. Let's keep in contact, and I will eagerly follow the progress that you're going to have in setting out the freedom zones.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Cody. And for our audience, we're going to have another musical interlude, and then we'll transition to a setting where we can talk a bit more about RAADfest. So here we go. right, greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to RAADfest. This is our discussion component of the stream after the presentation by Cody Dean of Immortalis and the great interview that I had with Cody just now. So thank you to everyone. I apologize for the technical difficulties at the beginning. I figured out which device's microphone would be best for the audio, but this is really an experiment for us. In the US Transhumanist Party previously, we've brought you sessions from events like Longevity Summit Dublin, and we've brought you pre-recorded segments from events like RAADfest, but we've never been in the thick of it before, just live streaming a presentation. So Cody was very kind to enable that and facilitate that, and then facilitate the interview in his booth. And I hope that you heard the majority of it and you found the discussion interesting and insightful. Now I will focus on the chat and the comments in the chat. So I know Mike Lazine has a question. How was I able to drop in this musical piece being on site with RAADfest? So I appreciate your good words, Mike. And the way I did that was I uploaded the videos to our StreamYard interface beforehand, so I could just click play and they would be ready to go. So thank you for that question. Now, Francois Joanneau says AI needs to be educated with composers, real composers, composition to obey rules, otherwise it's only a flow. A concerto needs to travel from sad to joyful tones through appeasing ones. I would encourage you to listen to the 52 weeks we had that stream of an AI generated Baroque grand concerto. And that stream actually was one that I had curated. I had assembled from 52 distinct movements that were separately generated through the UDO AI. So the human intentionality was still there, in the sense that I picked the movements that represented particular weeks of the year to the greatest extent that made sense to me as a human listener. And I also picked the mostly AI generated, though some historical artworks to go along with those. And I think the future of art, of music, and of a lot of human endeavor, both creative endeavor and technical endeavor, is going to be one of AI-human collaboration. So the music that you heard today was human created, in the sense that I composed my pieces note for note, and I used composition software to put in the notation, and then Jason used other programs to remaster those. But those are very much human creations every step of the way, and there's a lot of intentionality as well. And Mike Lazine says, yes, I remember that virtual enlightenment salon that we had, and it came out sounding pretty good. So Jason asks, is Bill Andrews there and is Aubrey there? Yes, both of them are very much there. And Aubrey is one of the organizers of RAADfest this year. Aubrey and the Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation are the major sponsors of RAADfest, in addition to the Coalition for Radical Life Extension, which has been running it every year. So this year it was a partnership precisely because Aubrey could bring in scientists who normally wouldn't attend this kind of conference, but who provided a lot of technical rigor. So most people here are dedicated immortalists from, let's say, the perspective of their values, the perspective of the goals that they seek to achieve. But what they really need, in my view, are the means to achieve this, and that's what the scientists are here for. And this also helps to inform the scientists about the community that is here, that is both supportive of their work and wants them to take their work to the next level. And of course, Bill Andrews is here as well. Bill Andrews is part of the board of the Coalition for Radical Life Extension, so he has been here at every RAADfest. He mentioned the Transhumanist Party in 2 of his presentations. I have a Facebook post and an Instagram post and an X post about his first presentation. He had a second one on the main stage where he also showed this slide where he had 2 logos, the Coalition for Radical Life Extension and the U.S. Transhumanist Party. So he's very much an ally of ours, and there will be more pictures to come, more media to come from this RAADfest more generally. But I would say Aubrey and Bill have long been among our greatest supporters and our greatest collaborators, so of course they would be here. Question from Mike Lazine. Who was the founder of RAADfest? Was it Aubrey? So Aubrey was one of a group of people who got together, I believe it was in late 2015, and did the organizational work for the first RAADfest, which occurred in the summer of 2016. So these people formed what is called the Coalition for Radical Life Extension, and among them are people like Jim Stroll, Joe Bardeen, Bill Falloon, whom I think many life extension enthusiasts know since he has been promoting, let's say, medications, supplements, approaches toward healthy life extension since the 1980s, and also fighting against FDA restrictions on people's ability to pursue those kinds of treatments or those approaches. Liz Parrish is also a key contributor, and she has been there since the beginning. So these are the people who were on stage today: Aubrey DeGray, Bill Andrews, Bill Falloon, Liz Parrish, Jim Stroll, and Joe Bardeen. So it's a collaborative effort. It has always been an effort where multiple organizations took part and contributed, and I have been there as well every single RAADfest now for 10 RAADfests. It's interesting because I asked the panel a question at the end. So there was a panel of the Coalition for Radical Life Extension board. And almost 10 years ago, on October 1st, 2015, I hosted a virtual panel. This was before I even became chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party, called How Can Life Extension Become as Popular as the War on Cancer? And you can find that fairly easily on my YouTube channel. It's actually still, to this day, one of my best viewed panels. What was notable about this panel was that Liz Parrish was a special guest, and she had announced that BioViva had the first successful trial of a combination gene therapy in a patient. At that point, she didn't announce that she was that patient. She just said there was a patient who received the combination gene therapy, and that person was doing well, no adverse side effects. And a few days later, we found out that that patient was indeed Liz, but she made that announcement for the first time on the panel that I hosted. So I asked the coalition board, essentially, how can life extension become as popular as the war on cancer, especially since here we are a little less than 10 years later. I think life extension has become more popular in the sense that there is a greater community. There are events such as RAADfest. Of course, we have the Transhumanist Party that has made considerable inroads since that time, but we're still not, let's say, a mainstream kind of endeavor. We don't have millions and, I would say, with regard to cancer, billions of people who agree that defeating aging is a worthwhile goal. So I solicited ideas from the panel, and what Aubrey said was interesting in that Aubrey believes the war on cancer, in terms of funding and in terms of the impact of that campaign on the actual medical progress, was a drop in the bucket relative to what really is needed and relative to total funding for medical research. What he thinks the better analogy ought to be is to the war on COVID. How when the COVID-19 pandemic began, the world essentially pivoted very rapidly toward the COVID response, toward fighting it, toward an accelerated development of COVID vaccines, Operation Warp Speed. And for at least, let's say, a year and a half, people throughout the world, by and large, recognized the urgency and importance of combating COVID. So Aubrey thinks we need a new COVID scale war on aging. And the challenge is how to get people to perceive that degree of urgency, that degree of salience to this problem that afflicts all of us. Whereas COVID killed some people and made life very hard for many more people, it affected me personally, it affected others in the USTP and others watching this personally. So COVID was a terrible menace. It deserved to be fought. I think it's a tragedy that many in the world and in our political system have essentially given up on fighting COVID, but aging is a much greater menace. Aging also increases the susceptibility to COVID greatly, but aging will kill all of us unless aging can be reversed. So how do we get the general public to recognize this urgency? There has been an increasing discussion within the longevity community about theories of change. So what is one's view of how we can viably get from here to there? And different people have widely differing opinions on what is a reasonable theory of change. Aubrey's theory of change is that what matter are the influencers, people like Oprah Winfrey or Joe Rogan or Lex Friedman. And the influencers have a lot of sway with the general public. The example he uses is when Oprah recommends a book for her audience to buy, millions of people go out and buy it. So if Oprah were to understand the importance and the urgency of combating aging, and she were to communicate that to her audience, all of a sudden we would have a massive movement aligned with us. Now, there are a few more steps in that theory of change that Aubrey has articulated, because Oprah isn't just going to go ahead and say that on her own, because in his view, influencers want to stay influential and they want to maintain the perception among their audience that they are credible. And the way that they do that is essentially by being right. And the way that they try to hedge their bets in terms of whether their particular recommendations or pronouncements are right is to listen to the experts. So Oprah and other influencers are going to listen to what are considered respected mainstream scientists within the biogerontology community, who are going to give their assessments about whether defeating aging within our lifetimes is feasible or not. And I think actually that's why the war on cancer is a mainstream cause, because there are a lot of scientists, oncologists who are saying, yes, we can cure cancer within our lifetimes. At the very least, we can greatly reduce cancer mortality. And these are the experts who are saying, well, we need more investment in this. We need more funding. But I think everyone understands the devastation of cancer. Everyone understands that curing it would be a worthwhile goal. Not everyone understood it before the 1970s, before Richard Nixon declared war on cancer. And in the decades leading up to that, of course, there was a huge activist effort to persuade the US federal government to take that direction. But in terms of biogerontologists, how do we get them to say that curing aging or reversing aging within our lifetimes is feasible? They, according to Aubrey, need to be persuaded that certain time frame predictions are plausible. And right now, the biomedical gerontologists are too cautious in giving time frame predictions because there is a lot of uncertainty. So Aubrey's probabilistic time frame is a 50% probability of reaching longevity escape velocity in 12 to 15 years with sufficient funding. So he challenged during an earlier panel this morning his colleagues within the biogerontological community, people like Brian Kennedy, Michael West, Matt Kaberlein, and Jean Hébert. Dr. Jean Hébert, who is now with ARPA-H, was on the panel to give some time frame predictions about when it might be possible to at least crucially reverse aspects of aging. So a lot of them did say that within the next 10 years or so, if we put in sufficient effort, we could get an increase in either lifespan or health span by anywhere between 10 and 20 years. And in practice, Aubrey's view is that would be longevity escape velocity, because from then on, we could iterate. Now, many of those other scientists don't want to go as far as stating that. They don't want to go as far as saying, if we increase longevity by 20 years, then the people who live that long are going to benefit from the next generation of advances, and then the generation of advances after that, and will in effect have open-ended lifespans. But Aubrey thinks it may be okay for enough scientists to say within the next decade or decade and a half, we can get lifespan extension by 10 to 20 years. And that could get enough people excited. Healthy lifespan extension, which means these people aren't going to be frail, they're not going to be debilitated, they're going to be able to live their lives in a way that they find meaningful and enjoyable. So Mike Lazine says, oh goody, I should be able to see LEV by the time I'm 60 or 70. Nice. And that's my hope as well. Of course, always with progress, it's contingent. And I think it's contingent on public support, it's contingent on advocacy, it's contingent on funding. And those of us who recognize the importance of this goal, who want to see it for ourselves, need to do our part in advocating for it. So speaking of that, I gave a presentation yesterday, July 12th, as part of the activism panel that was coordinated by Jose Cordero, whom you saw on stage today. Another one of the speakers was Cody Dean, and a third speaker after Cody and myself was Joe Bardeen of the Coalition for Radical Life Extension. So Cody gave a presentation on longevity activism. I gave a presentation on LEV the game, on longevity escape velocity. Of course, for those of you who remember, we had a prior virtual enlightenment salon in May of 2024 demonstrating an earlier build of LEV the game, build 0.6. Now we have build 0.91 available for you to download and play from the US Transhumanist Party website. I hope to eventually have a recording of my presentation available from RAADfest and from Longevity Summit Dublin. So as you know, last week on July 4th of all days, I was in Dublin, Ireland, presenting on LEV the game. This time, the RAADfest presentation was better attended. I think in both presentations, the game was very well received. The people who were there were quite intrigued. This time, the improvement was that I could actually play a little bit of the game and have it be projected on screen and have the audience make selections on behalf of the character. The character we played as was named Lazarus Long in tribute to Robert Heinlein's book Methuselah's Children, where Lazarus Long was a long-lived protagonist. And he started out at the age of 65, both chronologically and biologically, and we got to the point where he got to benefit from a combination of 2 damage reversal sense treatments. And we only had a 15-minute session, so that's as far as I could go. But I'm glad that there was this interactive component, that the attendees could contribute their own recommendations as to what this character could do, because I think that's a great way to play the game, and that's a great way to get people actively engaged in thinking about the path from here to there. So what I just discussed with Cody, I no longer am content with just thinking about ideal systems or the outcomes we want to reach. Reality is messy, and it's turbulent, and people meet with adversity, they meet with setbacks. So how are we going to go from here to there? And it's not just a question that I need to answer for myself, it's a question that everybody needs to answer if they're going to support our movement, because they need to see a plausible path. They need to see that theory of change. And Luis, I acknowledge this, he writes that he's more pessimistic. He's in his late 20s and he doesn't think he's going to see LEV. A lot of people under 30 do not have a good view of the future. There was another speaker yesterday whom regular Enlightenment Salon attendees know, Kai Micah Mills. He's been our guest on 3 occasions, and he's also in his late 20s. He's about 10 years younger than I am. And he himself said that he thinks there's a high probability that he will have to be cryopreserved at some point. This is why he has such a heavy focus on cryonics in terms of the startup organizations that he runs. As our viewers will remember, Kai Micah Mills is a serial entrepreneur. He is the founder of CryoPets, CryoDAO, and HydraDAO, and he spoke during his presentation also about several other initiatives, decentralized autonomous organizations that he's interested in starting in terms of targeting specific aspects of aging and getting decentralized sources of funding for various scientific research projects. So I think he's an extremely admirable individual, quite energetic as well. And he has also been involved in gaming previously as an entrepreneur. So he did a lot with Minecraft when he was a teenager. He dropped out of high school actually and focused on entrepreneurship, including in the area of gaming. He made a bit of money, and to his credit, he put a lot of that money toward these longevity-oriented or cryonics-oriented organizations. So I would venture to say that Kai and Luis are within a few years of one another. Kai has a kind of similarly pessimistic outlook, but he still thinks he can do something about it. He still thinks he can contribute, and he thinks it would be great if he didn't have to undergo cryopreservation. I asked him in the Q&A, what does he do as a serial entrepreneur to delegate, to establish good governance structures so that once he founds a company or a DAO, it can just keep going on its own, maybe with some contribution from him, but how does he designate people who he can trust to run a particular organization so that he can focus on starting the next organization? The answer that he gave rather surprised me a bit, maybe not completely, but he actually said he does all of this pretty much himself, and he just spends all of his time doing it and gets very little sleep and maybe even undermines his own health in the process. But for him, it is very much a mission that he is pursuing, and he is younger than many of us, so at 27, people have more energy than they do at, say, 37 or later. And I do hope that he's able to find more, let's say, structural approaches or delegation-based approaches later on to keep those organizations going. But nonetheless, I admire that. I tell people in their late teens, early 20s that the 20s are really a decade where you should try to go as fast as possible and achieve as much as you can achieve, because you build up the resources, you build up the achievements, you build up the intellectual capital that you then draw upon later on in your life, when you might not have as much energy, you might not have as much time, you might be spread too thin, but you leverage those earlier accomplishments to continue to be productive, to continue to contribute. And the older you get, the more delegation you need to do. That's just a fact right now, as we're still vulnerable to biological aging. Now, I do wonder, and I have thought about this for quite some time, why is it that many younger people, and by younger I mean younger than 30, are perhaps more pessimistic? I think it has to do with the cost of living crisis. And I notice a difference in terms of outlook between, say, people in their late teens and early 20s versus people in their late 20s. Now, why is that? My hypothesis, this is not proof, this is from my anecdotal experience. My hypothesis is that people in their late teens and early 20s, they're still supported by a variety of, let's say, institutions, from the family, if they have parents who pay for their educations or provide them with upkeep, or if they're going to college, the college infrastructure supports them, and even if they're paying a lot in tuition, they don't feel the consequences of that yet. And that gives them some breathing room. That gives them room, of course, to pursue academics, which is what they're intended to do, but it also gives them room to do a bit more intellectual exploration in a bit more of a leisurely fashion, even though it might not seem that way when you're in college, when you're taking a lot of courses and you're busy with homework or extracurricular activities or whatever it is. I hope that's what you're busy with when you're in college, or if you're a serial entrepreneur like Kai was at that age, maybe you do have a family support infrastructure. By the time people are in their late 20s, especially in a country like the United States, which really prioritizes culturally people kind of separating from their extended families, I don't know if that's a great way to operate actually, but when you're on your own in your late 20s and the cost of housing is astronomically high and inflation has already taken its toll, and jobs, especially entry-level jobs, pay about as much as they did 15 years ago. Maybe there was a mild cost of living adjustment. All of a sudden, you are swamped with everyday concerns, with survival pressures. And you see other people in that situation. A lot of people in this younger generation see housing as being out of reach. Even in my generation, though I was an exception because I bought a house very early after graduating from college. I bought a house in 2010, so I benefited from the collapse of the housing bubble, and I paid off my mortgage by the time I was 29, and that gave me a lot of breathing room. It still didn't make my life easy, but it made it manageable for me to focus on the realm of ideas, to focus on transhumanism, to have some spare funds to attend conferences and undertake my own projects like fund LEV the game. Do a lot of people in their late 20s now have the confidence that by the time they're in their 30s, they'll have the resources to do that? Probably not. And that's very unfortunate. And I think that's one reason why a lot of the younger generation not only has that kind of pessimism that Luis expressed, but they also gravitate towards socialism. They think socialism is going to solve that problem somehow through redistribution of wealth or checking what they consider to be the predatory behavior that led to that dynamic. I don't think that's a correct leap to make from that predicament, because the United States didn't have socialism in the 1980s or the 1990s. And that was a kind of golden age for young people to become financially prosperous very quickly. You could get into the middle class. Maybe most people didn't get into the upper middle class, but if you were a college-educated professional, you could even get into the upper middle class very easily by the time you were 30. And that explains a lot of the difference in outlooks. But that wasn't a socialistic society. It was a market economy with less scarcity, more housing supply, greater ease of housing construction, fewer barriers to making things, fewer barriers to scientific and technological innovation. The 1990s were also a more techno-optimistic decade. And I'm actually old enough to remember what the sense of life was before the September 11th attacks of 2001. And some of that residual sense of life persisted up until the Great Recession, the economic collapse in 2008. But since that time, of course, a lot of people who are in their late 20s now don't remember what life was like before then. And they see struggle, they see scarcity, they do see technological advancement, but they see advancement mostly in the world of bits, not the world of atoms, as Peter Thiel has characterized it. And they don't see as much of the translation from bits to atoms. So we need to see more translation. And we do need to get these economic issues taken care of. I think there needs to be massive liberalization of housing construction. I think most zoning laws should be abolished. A lot of commercially zoned buildings should be repurposed to residential buildings. I think a lot of building codes need to be relaxed. I think we need to sell or at least lease a lot of the federally owned land, which is currently not being used for anything, and irrigate it, use it for commerce, for agriculture, and to construct a lot more housing. And we need to leverage new technologies of 3D printing, as well as other modular construction techniques to massively increase the housing supply. And to all the socialists watching this, maybe you'll like what I'm about to say. Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union between 1955 and 1964, essentially solved the housing problem in the Soviet Union through essentially mass construction of modular homes that were very easy to build. They were about 2 to 4 stories tall each. They used essentially panels that could be prefabricated and then shipped on site and assembled fairly easily. So they could get those apartment buildings erected in several days. And these were not like luxury apartments at all. They had flimsy walls. There were a lot of complaints. But a lot of the people there prior to Khrushchev's era, they lived in essentially communal housing. So multiple families would inhabit essentially barracks-style housing, and it was terrible. During the Stalin era, sometimes people would report on one another and falsely accuse one another of subversive activities so that one family could get essentially deported to a labor camp or worse, and the family that remained there that reported on them could have the apartment or the communal facility all to themselves. So that's how bad it was. And Khrushchev built enough housing to enable most families to have their own apartment. It was a massive leap forward, but many of these apartment buildings are still there. Others have been built since that time, but the post-Soviet countries have no homelessness, essentially. They have many other problems, but they don't have the problem of homelessness. And the sight of homeless people on the streets of major American cities and European cities, by the way, too, is pretty bewildering and disconcerting to anyone from the former Soviet Union. So I will say that if today the US federal government or state governments or local governments decided to undertake that kind of massive construction of modular housing or 3D printed homes, I wouldn't oppose that. Despite my small L libertarian streak, I think solving the problem of housing is absolutely urgent. And while Luis writes, Gennady has a point on this. Well, thank you, Luis. And he says abundant socialism is the correct direction. Mike Lazine writes, I agree that zoning laws should be abolished, and everything else that Gennady is saying right on point. So thank you very much. And I think that really goes to the point of pragmatism. So as I've said, I want these problems to be solved, including the problems that concern younger people today. So I don't want them to face a scarcity of housing. I don't want them to face a cost of living crisis. I want there to be material abundance. I want there to be confidence in the future, hope for the future. And it's not even so much about the absolute standard of living at any given time, because historically, there have been more techno-optimistic eras than this one. The issue is in terms of relative movement, how people perceive the trajectory of their lives, what has already happened, and what they think is likely to happen. So I think about this for myself. Why might I be more optimistic than a lot of people in their late 20s today? It's not only that I'm a decade older and I remember what the United States was like before the Great Recession, and I was able to get a house in time. Yes, all of that happened. But I was also born in the Soviet Union, and I saw when it became Belarus what happened with the hyperinflation, but also what happened with the economic liberalization, which gave more opportunities. And I saw the rise in prosperity in terms of my own standard of living, in terms of my own family. Just by immigrating to the United States, my family was able to get a much higher standard of living. So in my lifetime, I was able to move from what in the US would be considered a poverty level standard of living. It wasn't seen that way in the former Soviet Union, certainly, relatively speaking, we were still middle class there. But from a much lower standard of living to what's essentially upper middle class in the United States. I say I'm upper middle class on a good day if I feel like it. But that's a huge change. And it's coupled with a technological change, because the Soviet Union was behind technologically. So vinyl records, black and white television were still common occurrences. They certainly were in my family. I had a vinyl record player as a child. I had a black and white television set. There was one color television set in my house. When my father first came over from the United States, he bought a PC. He brought a PC over from the US. This was unheard of in Minsk. And in fact, we had to keep the PC behind closed doors in a separate room of the house whenever we had visitors, even friends, because people might tell other people and word might spread and we might be a target. Just because we had a PC in our home, we might be a target for robbers. So I went from that to a situation where I can do a live stream from RAADfest using multiple devices and yes, patchy Wi-Fi, but this is futuristic communication capability compared to what I experienced as a child. So the trajectory of my life has very much been one of rapid improvement. And I think that's why I have less status quo bias than most people. It's why I see the potential for the future being significantly different from the present, because I know that the present is significantly different from the past. And I think for younger people, mindset is crucial and perspective is crucial. Because even if you're facing financial challenges, you're facing challenges in terms of the perceived trajectory or momentum of your life, keep in mind that pretty much every one of us who is older, even who's a decade older, would gladly trade places with you just for that additional decade of time. I've told 18-year-olds I would gladly give up all of my money if that would make me biologically 18 again and start over financially, hopefully keep all the knowledge that I have and have a continuity of I-ness, because that is the most important for me. But health is the greatest wealth. And people who are biologically younger are healthier, and they have more of that wealth, and they have more of an opportunity to achieve this. And we have right now immense possibilities with technology, with harnessing generative AI, as we discussed earlier. But also longevity therapies are emerging, are on the horizon. They are much closer now than they were 10 years ago when RAADfest began. So I just want people to have that perspective. And Mike Lazine asked, when did the Soviet Union fall? 1991, though really the collapse began in earnest in 1989 when the Berlin Wall fell, and then there was a series of collapses of communist regimes throughout Eastern Europe. And then starting in 1990, when the Baltic states seceded, essentially the individual republics that comprised the USSR began to fall apart. But it was in 1991 that the Soviet Union was officially dissolved, in December 1991, and essentially it was agreed that this would be a peaceful dissolution into the 15 republics that comprised the Soviet Union. And I would say the collapse of the Soviet Union, it brought about a lot of turmoil in the short term. In the long term, it was a highly beneficial phenomenon. And it was also a remarkable phenomenon because the immediate collapse was completely peaceful. It was just done by mutual agreement. Now, there were loose ends that were left untied, and that led to essentially simmering resentments that flared up into conflicts later on. And we especially saw that in the Central Asian republics. We saw that between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We saw that in Georgia. We're seeing that now between Russia and Ukraine. But we are now 34 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The immediate collapse was peaceful. And that was, I think, one of the greatest testaments to the progress of the human species, because usually these kinds of collapses end up in civil war right away. But what was also important about the collapse of the Soviet Union is that it helped many of the people there, if they were determined enough to find better lives. I had this conversation with my father shortly after my grandfather died, and he remarked that essentially in the Soviet Union, if the Soviet Union had continued and my family had continued to live there, there would have been perhaps more day-to-day stability, but by this time my grandfather would have certainly been dead. He would have probably died in his 70s, and even my father would have been dead, and he's still very much alive. So the collapse of the Soviet Union was tremendously beneficial for my family in lengthening the lifespans of its members. And I think for me personally, based on the story that I related, and that's one reason why I don't have a lot of sympathies for socialism as an ideological system or an economic system. But I do think there are lessons to be drawn from that society, from that time period, from the key figures, from the thinkers, including the cosmists who had a presence in the early years of the Soviet Union, who inspired endeavors like the Soviet space program or the nexus of scientific institutions and research endeavors, which in many cases were not ideological. The insights from that research could be broadly applied to improve the human condition. So it's important to have a nuanced perspective on that. And also, of course, one key insight that a lot of people in the longevity community have noted, many strong longevity supporters, disproportionate to their share of the world's population, hail from the former Soviet Union. And there are many reasons for that. The cultural influence of cosmism is one of those. And I also think the observation that systems can collapse and that the status quo is not necessarily going to hold indefinitely, that the future can be very much different from the present, just like the present can be very much different from the past, given what people in Eastern Europe have lived through, the political turmoil, the transitions, the different political systems. It shows these people that we can also make a much better future. So it is very much a nuanced perspective. And Jason writes, yes, we never had World War III like we all feared between NATO and the USSR. If you think about it, things could have worked out way worse. We should be thankful. And yes, we should all be thankful that we're alive now, that we managed to, let's say, bypass nuclear war during the Cold War period, which was a period of great existential risk, and even more recently during the war between Russia and Ukraine. That could have escalated into a nuclear war, especially in 2022. Right now, my view is that risk is much lower. I still think that war should be ended. I still will not see the existential risk as being zero, or even, let's say, functionally zero until that war is ended. But I think we dodged a lot of existential bullets, so to speak, for the human species. And again, that's a credit to the progress that has been made. I don't want to discount that. And I don't want to only focus on the risks and the dangers. I also want to focus on the opportunities. Because we, as transhumanists, should be techno-optimists. And we are, instead of being a party of fear, we are a party of hope. Though I did say in my remarks, in response to one of the questions, it was actually a question posed by the Grim Reaper, but you'll see more of that in the future. So the Grim Reaper essentially asked, why do people have such fear and anxiety toward death? And the answer that I gave was, I am not going to conceal the fact that I fear death. But if you fear something, one should go deeper. There's a reason for why one would fear something. And it's a fear of loss. It's a fear of losing something that one values. So why would I fear death? Death is the loss of life. I value life, and I love life, and I want to keep on living. So fear of death is not bad. Fear can be a powerful motivator. But the root of the fear of death is love of life. And the reason why we do what we do, why we pursue radical life extension, why we pursue the advancement of humanity is because we love life. And to spread that love of life, I think can alleviate a lot of the pessimism. It can alleviate a lot of the sense of meaninglessness and existential despair that unfortunately affects a large portion of the younger generation. So we have a nice question here from Witchmaster, who wonders, what would the world look like if the transhumanists had broad political power and a tremendous budget like NASA? So assuming we had no significant political constraints and no significant funding constraints, that's a good question. So right away, we would invest massive amounts of money into anti-aging research. The U.S. Transhumanist Party platform already advocates for a $100 billion annual funding package for life extension research and a $10 billion annual funding package for research into reversible cryopreservation techniques. Along with that, of course, we would advocate tremendous funding for public health, for vaccination research, for building up stockpiles of equipment, for rapidly training a force of medical practitioners, both to respond to emergencies like pandemics and just provide better medical service, more accessible medical service. Since the start of the COVID pandemic, we've advocated a doubling of the U.S. hospital capacity through rapid construction techniques. So all of those are initiatives that the U.S. Transhumanist Party would support. And of course, we would want to liberalize the regulatory constraints in terms of the FDA review process. We would not want it to take 10 to 15 years. We would want patients to have the freedom to try medical treatments that haven't yet passed through the full 3-phase clinical trial process. If the treatments are safe and people want to experiment with them for their own health and longevity, even if they're not terminally ill, they should have the right to do that. And we do have a question also from our producer, Bill Skywatcher. Should we look at other countries investing in longevity? It seems science is taking a backseat in terms of U.S. research. Yes, I want to comment on that, since that was a common theme in this year's RAADfest. A lot of the scientists on stage are deeply troubled by the funding cuts to the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, as well as the general anti-science attitude that is coming out of the current U.S. administration, the people being laid off in research-oriented agencies like the NIH, and also scientists being persecuted. Of course, there's political persecution of Harvard University by the Trump administration. David Sinclair's lab got its funding cut off, but there are other instances as well. So Michael West, Dr. Michael West, who is a pioneer in anti-aging research, he received a special award at this year's RAADfest called the Bacon Prize, named after Roger Bacon and Sir Francis Bacon. And he gave a kind of short acceptance speech. He dedicated his acceptance speech to Ksenia Petrova, who is a Russian scientist. She was working in, I believe, one of George Church's labs, and she got arrested and put in jail for 3 months for bringing in slide samples of tissues from Russia. So she got arrested for bringing in research samples, completely harmless, non-pathogenic samples just for research purposes. And the MAGA crowd is essentially clamoring for harshness just because she's a foreigner, just because she's Russian, just because they want to show toughness to immigrants. And it makes absolutely no sense, because this is a scientist who has been focused on anti-aging research. She hasn't even been ideological about it. But this crackdown, this thoughtless crackdown, not even based on ideology, but based on surface level appearances. Oh, this is a government initiative, so the Trump administration thinks it should be cut, or these people are foreigners, the Trump administration thinks they should be cracked down on. That's just such a travesty. And it is going to set back science funding in the United States, so we do need to look at other countries. Singapore is very promising, and a lot of longevity clinics, a lot of longevity startups have been established in Singapore. One prominent scientist who is based there is Dr. Brian Kennedy, who was a prominent speaker at this year's RAADfest. And of course, I think even the European Union is going to be a more welcoming place for longevity research than the US. And Bill Skywatcher writes, even scientists attending conferences in the US from outside are being harassed if they are deemed hostile against US policy. It is an absolute tragedy. I just hope that in the long arc of history, this will be a downward blip, like COVID was a downward blip, but that we can recover from this. And it's absolutely crucial to have a movement like ours, and to have organizations like the U.S. Transhumanist Party, and to have events like RAADfest and other conferences like Longevity Summit Dublin, conferences outside of the United States. We're going to need our allies and friends outside of the U.S. to tide us through this, because we may be in for a few difficult years ahead, but in the meantime, science and technology are progressing, and we need to keep that in mind. So thank you very much to everybody who attended today. In terms of our experimental live stream, we had a few technical issues, but overall it went quite well. And I'm pleased to be able to have had a conversation with our dedicated online viewers. I hope that we can all live long and prosper.